So Quinn Ewers played almost the entire season with a torn oblique. We found that out yesterday. Does that change your perspective of Quinn Ewers' final season at the University of Texas? We discuss on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So, in the first segment, like I mentioned earlier, we got a bombshell about some injury news about Quinn Ewers. And once again, he played almost the entire season with a torn oblique. Does that change your perspective of his final season at the 40 acres? We discussed that in the first segment. In the second segment, the NFL Combine is getting underway, and I believe that there's some Texas Longhorn players that have a lot to prove at the Combine, right? There's going to be 14 of them, and I think there's a couple of them that have a lot to prove that could really affect their draft status in terms of what they're able to do this weekend in Indy. And then in the last segment, if you're watching on YouTube, you see Texas BB on the screen because we have a Texas basketball and baseball update. All of that and more, both BB, right? All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So once again, we found out yesterday, as Quinn Ewers continues to prepare himself for the NFL Draft Combine, which is getting underway in Indy. I believe the interviews start today, and then the actual um, workouts and stuff are from Thursday through throughout the rest of the weekend. But we found out that Quinn Ewers is now fully recovered from a torn oblique. Right, when we were under the impression that he just had a strained oblique, we now know that it was torn, and we now know that he was dealing with it the entire season for the most part, right? Because I was at the UTSA game, and I remember when he went down, and the thought was that he got hurt in the UTSA game with the strained oblique, but now it seems as though he hurt it in the Michigan game, potentially tore it, aggravated it in the UTSA game, had to miss a few games, came back against Oklahoma, was not fully healthy, but still played on it for the remainder of the season. Now, the torn oblique would be on the left side of his body. He is a right-handed thrower. The torn oblique would be on the left side of his body, but still, right? You're imagining in any sport, baseball, football, basketball, any sport, but especially at the quarterback position, using that much torque from your torso, where your obliques are, even if it's not on your non-throwing side, you have to be in a great deal of pain and discomfort to be able to play through that, right? And so when you look at Quinn Ewers' season now, I wonder, does it put it more in perspective? Because he didn't have a bad season, but he also didn't have the season a lot of us were expecting, right? And a lot of us kind of, when we looked at the season, we said that we wanted to see Michigan game Quinn. Well, it seems as though the Michigan game was the last time that he was fully healthy. So is that the reason we didn't see Michigan game Quinn in air quotes for the rest of the season, because he has a torn oblique? It makes you wonder, right? Now, I think that one aspect of it is it does, even though we already kind of discussed this, it does give credence and credibility to the thought that he is injury prone at the quarterback position, right? Because we're thinking he just strained his oblique. He had a torn oblique. And I don't even remember him getting hit that hard, right? You know what I'm saying? But he had a torn oblique for the majority of the season. And so, it seems like you brush up against Quinn Ewers and something gets broken or torn, So that's something that, NFL teams are definitely going to have to, evaluate and think about. And then one interesting standpoint I saw is that if Steve Sarkisian knew that Quinn Ewers was playing with a torn oblique, then how come we didn't see Arch Manning more? Maybe that's a question for Steve Sarkisian. But ultimately, I think for me, it doesn't really change anything about the actual season he had. Because once again, like I said, he didn't, play lights out. He wasn't the best quarterback in college football by any means, but he didn't have a bad season. If we never found out that he was injured or had a torn oblique or that he wasn't fully healthy after the Oklahoma game, we wouldn't have thought anything of it. Right. And so I can't come back now and say, oh, well, this is why he played this way. This is why he played that way. I'm not sure, I'm not sure how much pain he was dealing with. It does give me, it does allow me the space to give him more respect. I appreciate, especially, in what he knew was his last season. And I mean, with Arch Manning back there, he didn't want to give up his job. So it makes sense that he would go out there and play hurt. But, you have to give respect to an athlete for doing that. All right. I know that wasn't easy, especially at the quarterback position. But I mean, when you look at his performances going from the Oklahoma game when he came back, first of all, if he was hurt in the UTSA game, even if it's against UTSA, he did have that bad interception, but he was 14 of 16 for 185 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was absolutely lighting them up. And he came back about a month later against OU, 20 of 29 for 199 yards, a touchdown. Did have a bad pick early. So, I mean, he was solid in that game. That's all we needed. I know we ran for over 200 yards against Oklahoma, beat them 34-3. Then the next game was, Georgia 30-15. Obviously, he was not great in that game at all. He was under a lot of pressure. He was unable to move, ran himself into some sacks, put himself in position to be sacked. Maybe you can explain that a little bit more with the torn oblique, but he wasn't mobile anyway. So that was just a bad game from Quinn Ewers. Vanderbilt, 3 touchdowns, but did have 2 interceptions, 288 yards. I thought really, one of the best games of his career, if not the best game of his career, was against Florida. We beat them 49-17. He was 19 of 27 for 333 yards and 5 touchdowns, passes, which was a career high for Quinn Ewers. And his average depth of target was over 9 yards. He was able to push the ball down the field in that game, something we hadn't seen all season. So maybe the oblique was feeling really good in that game. Arkansas was a little shaky, 20 of 32, 176 yards, 2 touchdowns, no turnovers, but was off in the second half and did have that crucial kind of 4th down or 3rd down pickup to seal the game against Arkansas when they made it close at the end. Kentucky, 20 of 31, 191 yards and 2 touchdowns, a little pedestrian. A&M, 17 of 28, 218 yards, and he threw the pick 6. And then against Georgia in the SEC championship game, once again, he wasn't good. 2 interceptions, less than 60% completion. Came back against Clemson, did have a pick, 17 of 24, 202 yards, a little pedestrian as well. Arizona State, obviously, he had the big moment at the end. People will say he had the interception that put Arizona State back in the game or, gave them life for a comeback. But 20 of 30, 322 yards, the 3 touchdowns, the 2 touchdown passes, in the overtimes to put that game away. And then, I didn't think he played great against Ohio State, but I don't think he played bad as well. Like, I'm not sure he was the reason we lost, but, ultimately he wasn't the reason we won anyway, either way. So either, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So, I think when you look at Quinn Ewers' season and you now know that he had a torn oblique, I'm not sure it really changes anything. Like I said, he didn't have a season where it was so bad that it's like, oh, it makes sense now because he had a torn oblique. And he didn't have a season that was so great that it was like, damn, he did that with a torn oblique. Like, if we didn't know he had a torn oblique, these would still probably look like regular Quinn Ewers numbers. You know what I'm saying? So, like I said, if anything, I could just put a little bit more respect on his name now, knowing that he was dealing with injury. But, even though it was somewhat of a bombshell, that he was hurt the whole season when we thought that he was healthy, it really doesn't change anything for me about his performances. Like I said, that looked like Quinn Ewers' torn oblique or not. So happy for him. Hope he does well at the combine. Quick word from our sponsors. And then we talk about the NFL draft combine, some Texas Longhorn players who I think need to have a strong showing. Of course, all 14 of them need to have a strong showing. But I think there's some players that really can make themselves some money or lose themselves some money in Indy this week. So we discuss. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. I know a lot of y'all were betting on Luka playing against the Mavericks in his first game last night. I know he had a triple-double, didn't shoot well from the field, but still had a triple-double. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you missed the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth-quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right. So, like I said, the NFL Draft Combine is getting underway today. You're going to see, some forever Longhorns, um, start that. Well, I don't want to say start the process, but kind of start that official NFL draft process of putting themselves out there in front of evaluators. Outside of their college tape, with the interviews, the 40 and all the drills and things of that nature. And then of course we'll have the pro days closer to the draft. Um, we remember last year, Texas made a lot of noise in the combine. First of all, they broke their record for most players invited to the combine, which I believe was 11, and then they broke it again this year at 14. But obviously, Xavier Worthy became the fastest man in NFL draft combine history, running the 4.21. We've seen a lot of fast players come through the combine. So I'm not anticipating any Longhorns breaking any records this season. But I do think there's a lot of Texas players that have a lot to prove. And, starting with the one that we spoke about in the last segment, Quinn Ewers. I think there's a lot of variance between where Quinn Ewers can get drafted right now, right? I just think that there's a lot of variance, right? It really, is going to take a team that has a ton of faith in him, just based on what I've seen in terms of the draft boards and the rankings, because, there's like a pretty consensus top two in Shadur Sanders and Cam Ward. And based on everything I've seen, I think that is legit, right? That's how it's supposed to be. I think Cam Ward and Shadur Sanders were a step above every other quarterback this season in college football. And they're both, probably going to be top 5 picks. And what we've seen is Shadur is not scheduled to work out at the combine. And I'm not sure if Cam Ward made a decision, but I do know that he was making a decision, right, about whether he was going to throw the ball or not at the combine. And that's kind of the new era of football, where it's like, I don't really have anything to lose, or I don't really have anything to gain by throwing at the combine. I would like to see them go out there and compete, but, you know, millions of dollars on the line. If you're already going to be a top 5 pick no matter what, then, why throw at the combine? It makes sense. I don't love it, but, this kind of makes business sense. But the reason they don't have to throw at the combine is because they've solidified themselves in their draft standing, right? Obviously, Quinn Ewers has not done that. And I think that he could go anywhere from the 3rd quarterback taken. There could be some team that says right behind Shadur and Cam, I think Quinn Ewers is the best quarterback or has the best potential. Or he could be 7th, right? Because when you look at it, his inability to move, there could be some teams that say we like Shadur, Cam, Dylan Gabriel, Will Howard, Jackson Dart, Jalen Milroe. We would take all of them over Quinn Ewers, right? So, like I said, I think he could go anywhere from being the 3rd quarterback taken in the draft to being the 7th quarterback taken in the draft. I think he could go anywhere from being a 2nd round pick, maybe even a 1st round pick, to being a 4th round pick. Right. And so, Quinn Ewers is scheduled to work out at the combine. I think it's very important for him to come out and have great interviews. Right. You want to show that you can be a franchise quarterback, that, give a team confidence that they can put the franchise on your shoulders. But also, you want to go out there, and we know Quinn Ewers can probably do this better than anybody. Right. Throwing routes on air, and prove, why you could be, a future franchise quarterback for an NFL team. I think that, like I said, he could be anywhere from the 3rd quarterback drafted to the 7th quarterback drafted. He could go from the 1st round to the 4th round, maybe if he slips. And so I think his combine performance is going to be huge, just in terms of, where Quinn Ewers gets drafted and how NFL evaluators look at him. Because, like I said, he is at a disadvantage when you could argue that there are 6 quarterbacks in the draft that would be more valuable in this era of football and this era of the National Football League than Quinn Ewers, because of their ability to move when things break down, right? When Quinn Ewers is a traditional pocket quarterback, that's not his strength. Like I said, Jalen Milroe, Jackson Dart, Dylan Gabriel, Will Howard, and then of course Shadur and Cam all have that ability to make things happen when a play breaks down. Quinn Ewers not so much. So, I think that he needs to come out and light it up this weekend in Indy and secure his spot as one of the top quarterbacks taken in this draft, because I do see the potential for him to slip and be sitting there for a long time, right? Longer than we ever thought Quinn Ewers would sit when draft time came around. Next one is Jahdae Barron, right? I know there's a lot of talk about him being a 1st round pick, and he's going to go fairly high. Like I said, he's going to be a top 40 pick regardless. But I think that when you look at Jahdae Barron, he really needs a strong showing just in terms of the physicals, right? Especially the 40-yard dash, because he does play corner. at the end of the day. And corner is a position that requires a lot of athleticism, right? You're chasing some of the best athletes in the world around at wide receiver, changing direction, anticipating moves, cutting in and out of breaks. You got to match them step for step. You got to be able to cover in the short, intermediate, and deep areas of the field, especially if somebody's going to use a first round pick on you at the corner position. Um, and so I think that based on the tape, Jahdae Barron is a first round pick, bar none, right? And that's why he was voted as the best DB in college football this season. The question is will the athleticism or will the measurables match up? Right? Because I think if Jahdae Barron runs a 4.3, he's a lock to go in the first round, probably a lock to go in the top 15, right? If he runs in the 4.3s. If he runs in between 4.40 and 4.45, then I think he's probably still a lock to go in the first round, but now you're probably talking that 20 to 32 range. I think anything under a 4.45 in that second round for Jahdae Barron gets a lot more realistic. Right. And like I said, the tape screams first round pick, but you got to be fast too. And unfortunately, we put a lot of weight on a 40-yard dash, right? Everything Jahdae Barron did in college is about to likely come down to a 5-second stretch. And it's crazy. It makes no sense, but that's just the way it is. So, like I said, I think if Jahdae Barron can run anything between a 4.30 and a 4.45, he can solidify his status as a first round pick. I think anything under a 4.45 in that second round becomes a lot more likely. I hope that's not the case because, like I said, the tape screams first round pick. But I do think that 40 is going to be really important for Jahdae Barron, right? Like one of the most important 40-yard dashes this weekend is going to be Jahdae Barron. Isaiah Bond is another one, right? Obviously, projected to come into the season for the Texas Longhorns as their number one wide receiver. And that wasn't the case, right? After having 600 plus yards, and a lot of deep touchdowns with Jalen Milroe last year at Alabama, he came to the University of Texas this year and just wasn't able to replicate those numbers, right? A lot, due to injury. And then, really just after the Oklahoma game, after he got hurt the first time, I believe he re-sprained the ankle, but he was just never the same, and so he did not have the season that he was expecting. And that is why now Matthew Golden, is projected to be a first round pick because he was able to step up in the absence of Isaiah Bond and become that number one target, number one wide receiver for the Texas Longhorns and Quinn Ewers. And now it makes you wonder what happens if you would have been able to blossom Matthew Golden into the way he did, but still had, fully healthy Isaiah Bond, right? What this offense would have looked like. Maybe, this could have been a championship team. But nonetheless, coming into the season, Isaiah Bond was getting mocked into the first round, right? It made sense. A wide receiver with that potential, with that explosiveness, with that speed, he's been getting mocked into the first round. But then obviously with the injuries and the lack of production, now he's largely been in second round talks, right? And so, when you look at it, I think that maybe he can't do anything necessarily to, still get himself into the first round. But if Isaiah Bond can go out there and run in the 4.3s, that's going to make him a lot of money this weekend because he's kind of become a forgotten about player, right? Like coming into the season, he was one of the most talked about prospects, especially at the wide receiver position. Now he's kind of been forgotten about, right? Nobody's really talking about him. If he comes out this weekend and runs in the 4.3s, that conversation about Isaiah Bond is going to pick up a lot more, right? Obviously, he'll have the drills. He'll have to do good in the drills, hopefully no drops and things like that. But that 40 for Isaiah Bond, like I said, if he runs in the 4.3s, that conversation will pick right back up. I'm not sure he can get into the first round conversation, but yeah, right. If he runs in the 4.3s, people will be talking about Isaiah Bond as one of the first wide receivers off the board. And it wouldn't shock me if somebody convinced themselves to take him in the first round just because, it's not like he dealt with a career-threatening injury. He had an ankle sprain, right? So if he could still prove that he's fast as hell, I mean, offense wins games in this league, right? And you're going to need a player like Isaiah Bond that can come out and be dangerous on offense. I mean, imagine if the Eagles, who already have, I'm not sure if Jahan Dotson is still going to be I lost my train of thought. I'm not sure if Jahan Dotson is still going to be under contract, but imagine a team like the Eagles who already have an AJ Brown, who already have a Devontae Smith, can make a luxury pick and get an Isaiah Bond at 32. A player that runs a 4-3 with Jalen Hurts that has a great deep ball. You never know, right? So I think that, even though it wasn't the season that he expected, he could still make himself a lot of money and put himself in a good position at the combine this weekend, Isaiah Bond. So those are three players I'm really going to have my eye on: Quinn Ewers, Jade Barron, Isaiah Bond. But I think Barron Sorrell, I think Jaden Blue. It's a lot of players, Jake Majors and Hayden Connor. Like, I think it's a lot of players that have a lot to prove this weekend that can make themselves some money in Indianapolis. All right, a quick word from the sponsors, and then a quick update on basketball and baseball. All right, so this Texas basketball team, after a horrible loss at South Carolina, Rodney Terry's boys must win tonight. Really must win the rest of the season. You have to make some noise in the SEC tournament, but must win tonight at Arkansas. It's going to be a tough environment. It's going to be a tough game to win, but they put themselves in this position where they have to go in and win it, right? I think, a loss in this game and that conversation about not making the tournament gets realistic, right? You could not afford to drop that South Carolina game, right? When you looked at these last 4 or 5 games, you were like, okay, or last 4 games, you were like, okay, 3-1, all right? Maybe you can drop one, but you've dropped the one, right? Against the worst team that was left on your schedule in South Carolina. So, yeah, you got to go out and beat Arkansas on the road. Tough environment tonight. They hate you. They hate Texas, but you got to win the game. We'll see if they do. Obviously, there's not a lot of confidence there, but you got to win the game. And I thought that when their backs were against the wall, they take care of South Carolina. They didn't. So I can't just say, well, they're going to take care of business because their backs are against the wall. I'm not sure how much that means to this group, but you got to win that game tonight against Arkansas on the road. The baseball team had a midweek game in the dish last night against Incarnate Word, and they were able to win the game 6-0, as you would expect. They would take care of business, right? Didn't really score until the end of the game, right? So it was a 1-0 game for a long time. They did come out early and score in the first. Adrian Rodriguez had a single, right, to put them up 1-0. But then once again, that score remained until the 7th inning, right? So as we saw against the games, against Dartmouth in those games, the offense never really just truly got going, not scoring more than 4 runs in any of those games. And then, like I said, against Incarnate Word, right, they went 6 runs without scoring, but came back in the 7th inning. And between the 7th inning and 8th innings, put 5 runs on the board. So they were able to come back in a big way. When you look at it, Rylan Galvin, he homered in the 7th inning to make it 3-0, right, a 2-run homer. And then Ethan Mendoza came back with a solo homer in that same inning, so to make it 4-0. So then they went into the 8th inning up 4-0 and ended up leaving the 8th inning up 6-0, right? Because you had, got to look at these names, right? Casey Borba hit an RBI triple, and then to make it 5-0, and then Tommy Farmer hit an RBI double to make it 6-0. So good stuff from the baseball team, beating the teams that they should beat. Maybe they should be scoring a little bit more. But what matters the most is winning, right? And so now this team is 6-1, and their next game is on Friday. Once again, they're going to be in Las Vegas for the Las Vegas Classic. So Friday against Washington, Saturday against Texas Tech. Going to have to be tuned into that one. That's going to be really good. And then Sunday against Illinois, all in Vegas, right? Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Welcome. Peace.